Today we will talk about the typology of disasters. We'll talk about earthquakes, flood and drainage, cyclone, and droughts and famines. This pertains to our block 2 of our first course. And we have with us Dr. Sahani, professor in our public administration faculty, and then Dr. S.M. Kulshrestha. He is former Director General, Indian Meteorological Department. And then we have Dr. E. Vayunandan from the Faculty of Public Administration. I would like to request Dr. Pradeep Sahani to first let us know something about our course.
Today, we are to talk about the typology of the disasters. As you are aware of, that there are 8 disasters which we have included therein. I find it to be a matter of privilege to welcome Dr. S.M. Kulshrestha with us. Dr. Kulshrestha had been associated with the Faculty of Public Administration, which has launched and developed this program in a rather qualitative manner. So as to say that besides having his involvement at the time of formation of the total program and its structure and what is to go into that, Dr. Kulshrestha was kind enough to agree to our request to be the course editor. May I bring it to your notice that how do we go about when we think of developing a program? In keeping with the societal needs and demands, an idea is conceived by the faculty and the faculty starts working on the development of that particular program. The very first thing is the identification of the experts who do meet in the fora of the expert committee, wherein different aspects which are to go in the program are discussed at length. At that particular time itself, Dr. Kulshrestha was kind enough to be associated with us. Then the course is being passed on to different experts in the area all over the country. That is a benchmark of IGNOU's functioning, that we do try to involve those people, those who have virtually worked in the area for the purpose of writing the course. And once those units the lessons are being received from the course writers, those are being formatted by the faculty and then those are passed on to the course editor. The course editor is normally the person who has fairly rich experience of that area, so that by virtue of his expertise, whatever is left over by the course writers or by the faculty could be included or incorporated therein in that formatted way which is virtually going to be beneficial for the learner. So the CDM01, that is Foundation Course in Disaster Management, is being edited by Dr. Kulshrestha. I once again welcome him to our studio. Dr. Kulshrestha, let us initiate our discussion on the very first disaster which we have included in the typology, that is an earthquake. We are aware of it that if we talk in the Indian context, that about 2/3 of the India, it lies in the seismic zones of moderate to severe intensity. As a learner, there are a number of things which do come into my mind. Earthquake is the most disastrous of all natural calamities, which catches people mostly unaware and unprepared. Though, of course, we normally say that, well, yesterday also we had discussed about it, that when we were talking about the meaning of the word disaster itself, that it is a French word which is a combination of 2 words, des and aster, that is bad or evil stars. If it is a bad or evil star, that is known as the earthquake. We find that earthquakes tend to create panic due to the trembling violations and the vibrations which are thereupon. As a learner, there are a number of things which do come into my mind. That first is, what is this seismic zones which we do talk about? Then often we say that, well, the earthquake come over there on the Richter scale of 6.4 or 6.5 or something. So before we come down to the causal phenomenon of earthquake and the general characteristics of earthquake, etc., I would certainly request you to kindly throw some light onto these particular rather technical terms so that we could understand it in a little better manner.
Thank you, Professor Sahani. You have asked me to first explain the 2 terms, that is, one is the Richter scale and other the seismic zones, the significance. But before I do that, I think I'll also like to re-emphasize what you have just now said, that the earthquake does create panic. For one reason, that earthquake in most of the cases is a quick onset, in the sense it doesn't give any previous warning. And as of today, there is no scientific basis to forecast an earthquake. And earthquake does take a lot of toll of human lives, but also causes a lot of destruction and after effects. Furthermore, it appears that no place, at least in our country, is free from earthquakes. Yes, some places are more prone, some places may be less prone. But how have we found out which places are more prone or which places are less prone? It's simply on the basis of the history. That is, a place, any particular place, whether an earthquake has taken place earlier, how many earthquakes have taken place, how intense were they, how much of destruction they caused. And based on that, we have this concept of seismic zones for our country. The country is divided into 5 seismic zones. You would learn it in the second part of the course, but let me explain it here. And particularly certain areas like the Himalayan area, Himalayan belt, Tarai, Assam, northeastern states, the area of Kutch, the area of Sundarbans, some areas Himachal Pradesh, and some area around Srinagar in Jammu and Kashmir. These are most prone to earthquakes. But as I said in the beginning, no place seems to be free of earthquakes in the country. Seismic zones do have a special merit, the concept itself, because, say, for example, when you have an idea that this place is more prone to earthquakes, certain precautions can be taken. For example, the building codes, the big buildings and the multi-story buildings made in earthquake-prone areas or where there is a greater likelihood there can be better constructed, certain precautions can be taken. What are those precautions? We will be learning as we go along. But meanwhile, let's talk about the Richter scale. I just now mentioned that some earthquakes are more intense, some earthquakes are less intense. And the Richter scale is a scale on which the strength of the earthquake, which is technically called magnitude of an earthquake, is measured. In fact, let's see how do earthquakes occur. There are 3 causes generally. One is the geological, something happening deep inside the earth. The other is tectonics, that's something happening on the surface of the earth. And the third is, of course, the volcanoes. Now, whatever may be the nature of the earthquake, the result is shaking of the earth, shaking of the earth's surface, shaking. Now, how much of the strength, inherent strength was there in that particular earthquake, that is measured on the Richter scale. To put it in other words, what is the power of the disturbance that took place deep inside the earth? That is, how much of the energy released there. Richter scale, the figure on the Richter scale is a measure of that power released inside. It has to be distinguished from the intensity measured at a place. Let me repeat. While Richter scale is a measure of the power of the earthquake, even say the intensity of the earthquake, but intensity of the earthquake at a particular place is different from the magnitude. Intensity depends upon how far you are away from the earthquake center. More away you are, far away you are, it will be less intense. However, the total magnitude of the earthquake remains fixed for a particular earthquake because that is the energy that got released deep inside. Professor Sani, if you permit me, while I am on the Richter scale, if you permit me, I'll explain 2 other related terms, that is the focus and the epicenter. Now, the place deep inside the earth where the disturbance takes place, that is the focus. It could be 10 kilometers below the earth's surface, it could be 50 kilometers. But then its projection just above it on the earth's surface is known as epicenter. For example, when we say that the Latur earthquake, the epicenter was near Latur. That means near Latur on the surface of the earth. But the disturbance took place deep inside below that place. So that's the difference between focus and epicenter. Generally, in our day-to-day working and also in the reports and also in disaster management field, we deal with 2 terms, that is the epicenter and the magnitude. These are more relevant. The other two terms, namely the focus and the intensity, they are not referred to that often.
Well, you have raised rather very relevant point when you had talked of the epicenter and you have talked of the tectonic maps, etc. Well, in order to know at little length about it, I would definitely draw your attention that let us, by taking it up in the sense that if we say that earthquake, when we talk of it, it means the slippage of crustal rock along a fault or area of strain and rebound to new alignment. If that is the case, and some of the general characteristics of the earthquake which you have been referring to with regard to vibrations and so on, can we say it, first of all, to talk of it, that it is the first characteristic of the earthquake is that it is shaking of the earth caused by waves on and below the earth's surface. And secondly, it is that the surface faulting, aftershocks, tsunamis, tremors, liquefaction, landslides, etc. Now, if these are the some of the important characteristics which we have before us when we refer to the earthquake as such, because earthquake, there is a purpose that when we started preparing about the typology of the disasters, why did we include earthquake at number 1 and why didn't we have something like say drought at the first end? Because the significance lies in the aspect that the damage caused by the earthquake is probably quite substantive. Besides that, it definitely brings people into the state of trauma. And there is a fair psychosis in the minds of the people. Like a few days ago when we came to know of it that this Maharashtra also has been included, and as the total Maharashtra is being included as the earthquake prone. So likewise we find that over the years number of the areas within India per se, those are being included into the earthquake prone areas list as such. And secondly, if we refer to it that it is not possible to predict magnitude, time and place of occurrence of an earthquake, this definitely attracts my attention onto it, that when we find that more and more of the scientific developments are taking place and people are experimenting into the area, is it possible to come little bit nearer to the forecasting or the predictability of the earthquake if we take clue from this specific characteristic of the earthquake, that it is virtually it is not possible to predict the magnitude, time and the place of occurrence of the earthquake?
And one more in this I want to add it because in Hyderabad there was a lot of because there was a water problem, so number of people went for taking out the groundwater through the boring wells and all that. So some area, because the water was not found at the they had to go to a lot of down, let's say like 1,000 feet. So that area sometime or other, because of drawing out the groundwater, there was also some indication that because of that there was there's some kind of shake in the some kind of symptom like earthquakes. So the government tried to do some kind of bring ordinance and say that they should not go for a digging of groundwater. So that is also one or other reasons which I.
There are two very important queries which Dr. Sahni has
we can
put to you. Yeah, whether we can predict earthquakes, whether the predictability of earthquakes has increased now, and what are the reasons behind the recurrent happenings, why the earthquakes have increased over the period of time, and where other indicators which can predict earthquakes.
Yes, I should like to begin from the beginning. As Professor Sahni put it, that earthquake has been listed here as the first disaster. Why? The question naturally arises. I think that's we did because earthquake by its very nature is different from the rest of the disasters. Yeah. And the reason being that, as I said, number one, that it comes most often without any warning. Number two, so far there's no method of forecasting earthquakes scientifically or with any amount of sort of a certainty, or shall I say credibility. These are the two basically which keep earthquake in a class by itself. Now the questions posed by Dr. Sahni, particularly about the forecasting, that whether with all the advance of science and all that have we not come to anywhere nearer it. Well, let me tell you, a number of approaches are being tried. Say the easiest is the statistical approach. In fact, it's on that type of approach that an individual scientist has recently said that there is some likelihood of occurrence of an earthquake somewhere in Madhya Pradesh, Jabalpur area and all that type of thing. But when and exactly where? I mean, that's the question. So we can't create panic, among the people when something is so uncertain. So really, I mean, we would not be justified in creating panic on the basis of a forecast which is just statistical and we cannot pinpoint it with any amount of certainty or credibility. The second approach has been that some of the precursors, as Madam Dhameja said just now, that precursors that are, and in fact they are listed here if you find in this unit, the instrumental precursors as well as the non-instrumental. For example, certain changes take place. The water in certain wells, either it dries up or comes up. The conductivity, electrical conductivity changes. All these things are seen. But then, obviously, these still have not reached a predictive value. In fact, the Chinese predicted one earthquake, mind you, only one earthquake, on the basis of abnormal behavior of animals. Now, the very next earthquake, which came only about a month or two after that, that could not be predicted by them, and that was many years ago, about 2 decades ago, and since then there has been no other repetition of a success story of that type. So there was a success story, but it is only one, and obviously you can't base a forecasting system. How do we define a disaster? Now, disaster, by the very nature of the term, their definitions will be subjective. But let me tell you the most accepted definition of disaster is that disaster is a situation in which the local community cannot deal with it by itself. That is where you need help from outside that community. So, disaster, if a building collapses, as you gave the examples, obviously the people in that building cannot deal with it. They need the help from outside that particular community in the building. But then the community outside the building, that part of the city, they may be able to deal with it. So obviously, as compared to one building disaster, multi-building disaster will naturally be a disaster of a higher scale. So you have asked the question, is there any measurement of scale? Yes, the only measurement of scale by which we define a disaster is that that particular community is not able to deal with it. In fact, some countries, they call it certain things are classified legally as national disaster. We may call it a disaster of, we don't have a classification of that type, but USA, for example, has got it, a disaster in which the local state even cannot deal with it, and it requires a national effort. So there is an element of a scale, but that scale is rather subjective, but the criterion is that it is beyond the capacity of the local community to deal with it. So what is TNT? I thought TNT is a very popularly known thing, particularly in the context of the bombs and atom bombs and the hydrogen bombs and nuclear bombs, equivalent of TNT. TNT is a chemical trinitrotoluene, which is the common traditional explosive used in the traditional bombs, probably of the First World War or Second World War vintage. But that comes in. For example, again referring to table 1, you will find that if there is an earthquake of magnitude 1 on the Richter scale, that is equal to the detonation of TNT 170 gram. But then if it is 3, it becomes 180 kilogram. And if it is a figure 6 like Latour that took place in 1993, it is equal to the explosion of TNT 5,700 tons in weight. So you see how the scale goes up. And if it is like the Assam earthquake of 1950 and earlier in 1897, 8.5 magnitude, it is equal to something like 2 crore 87 lakh tons. That is 287 to 10 to power 11 gram of TNT, which is a very, very enormous quantity. And later on it is also said that the energy released in 8.5 of this type of earthquake is equal to something like 10,000 atom bombs of the Hiroshima type. Remember what one bomb in Hiroshima did. And 10,000 bombs of that type, that's the energy released inside the earth. at the focus, as I explained a little while earlier in the case of Assam earthquake. So TNT and the scale, I think I have explained. Again to repeat, the unit of Richter scale is only a number, since it is calculated in a complicated way in a form of a ratio. I need not go into that detail, but its effect that is given in table 1.
One point which you have referred to that when you were kindly referring to the one success story based on the abnormal behavior of the animals. In fact, something like that was being talked of earlier as well when we were discussing about it in one of the conference. One gentleman, Professor B.G. Deshpande, who has worked substantively on the earthquake and who is the author of this unit as well, he was talking about the behavior of the dogs. Now, I mean, do you feel, doctor, that there is some way that whereby we could virtually make it more scientifically proved, and we could make use of it? Obvious for that is that one needs to have a thorough preparation on count of the people and the community and the officialdom which is involved in that, so that they could take clues from such kind of a normal behavior of the animals and could help us in making the forecasting or predictability of the earthquake.
Yeah, actually in Latur also, I read it in the papers that people had observed very unusual behavior in the animals, but they didn't pay any heed to it because they were not aware of the fact that this is also an indicator to an earthquake. I mean, in the sense that community itself does not have any idea about the various indicators, you know. I mean, they can be predicted a little bit. The predictability is difficult, but we can at least, you know, make them aware of the things they should pay attention to.
You see, the difficulty is this, that not only community, first of all, the scientists have to be aware of it. See, unless they are able to perform what are called controlled experiments and see and simulate those conditions and say how the behavior would be of, say, snakes or crows or dogs. So we can't go to the public and say, please watch that. Because in such cases of a disaster, we can't create the story of the wolf. Because then, as I say, credibility, which I repeated earlier a number of times, the word credibility is of paramount importance. Here, another difficulty which is arising now is, all of us are aware, that now with increased pollution, take the case of, say, dogs being used to track the criminals. Now, this is something which is totally proven, and they can track certain explosives. Their smelling power is very well advanced. But then in most of the cases, as we know, the dogs lose the track, so to say, after a little while, you know, they are not able to get the trail. The reason is that the whole thing is probably so complicated now because different types of garbage and different types of things available. So I think that pollution and the garbage and the things, all those things are also creating problem. So I personally do not know whether, while some people are following this line of approach for predicting an earthquake, but I do not know how much of success will be there and when. So it's a little difficult to guess at the moment. But coming to the question that Dr. Vayunandan raised, that somewhere where a lot of water, underground water is being taken out, extracted, there have been cases of some sort of thing. Yes, you see the water, this type of thing, what happens if you withdraw something from inside the earth? A sort of a subsidence that is sinking down of the earth is obviously, that is what you expect. And anything when it sinks down and some sort of a readjustment takes place in the crust of the earth, that is the upper part of the solid portion of the globe, then obviously there is bound to be a tremor of that type. So while based on the extraction of the water, which is again a curse at the moment in the country, we are doing it without any limit. There will be a subsidence, there could be some tremors, but I don't personally think that this will lead to a major earthquake. On the other hand, when we collect water in a reservoir, for example, a dam is built, reservoir, when we impound water there, enormous quantity of water, and that water is stagnant or is there, that puts pressure. So again, something has not been drawn from inside the earth, but then something has been piled over the earth. And that has been known to create some earthquake. For example, Koyna is a famous example of that, Koyna in Maharashtra. This type of thing is known as reservoir-induced seismicity, RIS, reservoir-induced seismicity. That is a question of earthquakes taking place due to a large quantity of water being impounded in reservoirs which are quite natural to be formed when a dam is built. So that's another thing. So water related things do happen.
So, do you feel, Dr. Kulshrestha, that the probability of occurrence can be determined, of course, but not the exact timings? The probability of occurrence can be determined, but not the exact timings. And coupled with that is that on the basis of historical incidents and observation and seismic activities monitoring, maybe we could do little bit of the forecasting of the earthquake. Of course, you had referred to it earlier that the scientists have to probably do much more advanced work in this particular direction. But these simple things which are proven all over, of course, though we still have not been able to find absolute kind of the forecasting for the earthquake, but a good number of the places something has been achieved onto it. Is it possible to refer to these things?
Yes, you see, let's go into, I mentioned that statistical methods are being tried, and they are precisely based on what you have said. See, let's again go back to how an earthquake takes place. As I said in the very beginning, something inside takes place, either due to geological reasons or tectonic reasons or volcanic reasons. Inside there is some disturbance of a high power takes place inside the earth. Now that particular thing, the energy is released. Some rock is broken, something hits something, or whatever happens, something explodes or whatever is there. Now that particular thing can manifest itself on the surface in two ways. One is sudden there can be a big explosion, or there can be a small tremor. Slowly the energy can be released. Take the analogy, if suppose there is steam inside a closed vessel, either it can burst the whole thing or it can slowly come out. Now, in that earlier case of slowly coming out, there will be a number of tremors which are known as foreshocks. But whether the entire energy inside has been released by the foreshocks, and so there will not be a major earthquake after that, or whether it is a precursor, indicator of a big thing coming, that's a million-dollar question. And that's what the scientists have to find out.
So besides these geological, tectonic and volcanic reasons, do you feel that there are also human reasons behind it? Are the earthquakes increasing every day because of human activity, increased population, or unplanned construction activity? And normally these reasons are also cited behind all natural disasters.
There's some signs.
No. In earthquakes, the only thing is the reservoir-induced seismicity, which I mentioned just now. But beyond that, I think earthquake involves too much of energy. As I gave these figures from table 1 in the unit, the energy involved is of very huge proportions, which human activity will not.
I think your question is more related to the vulnerability. That is more related to the vulnerability, that the amount of this energy released and the impact of that is that what are the factors which contribute to the vulnerability. You see, like you were referring to the location and the dense population, are the houses being structured in a manner which are not at all resistant to the earthquake kind of a thing.
And first of all, earthquake, as you know very well, is not a storm. And I don't think that there is anything like this that there's complete calm or silence inside at the focus, because first of all, unless the earthquake has occurred, we do not know where the focus was. On the other hand, there are indications that there are sometimes indication of certain activity taking place inside. As I said, foreshocks, or maybe some rocks hitting and the tension building. When take the case of a plate, a continental plate pushing against the other one, like the Indian plate pushing the Asian plate where the Himalayas are forming. It is going below that, what is called subducting. There's some sort of a tension takes place, stress takes place, and finally something breaks. So there are some cases, the sounds coming from the ground, and the audible sounds, but there are also foreshocks. So I have not heard, and I think there is nothing like this complete silence, because we wouldn't know whether it's complete silence. On the other hand, there is evidence, definite evidence, that some sort of a activity does take place. That is, the increase in activity does take place.
I would like to first of all refer a little bit about the vulnerability factors about it, because we will definitely be coming on to this preventive phase. Of course, when we find that the predictability is not that accurate, so we have to do something with regard to more of the preparedness, etc. But before we come down to it, Dr. Kulshrestha, I would like to bring to your kind notice something, maybe at a later stage you may like to comment upon it, that about the factors contributing to the vulnerability.
Mainly the question is about the predictability of earthquake. We have been discussing for quite some time now. As of now, suffice to say, as of now, there is no scientific method available to predict the earthquake. Most of the scientific work has been done, say in Japan, and apart from many other countries including India, but Japan has been in the forefront because they suffer the most. But of late, even they seem to have come to a conclusion that probably it is a case of diminishing returns, and this is reflected in their reduction of the funds available for that type of research. While research is going on, but at the moment there is not much hope.
Okay.
Vulnerability.
Yeah,
we
were
referring to the vulnerability, more specifically the factors which contribute to the vulnerability, more specifically with regard to the earthquake. The first of it is that, of course, location of settlements in seismic areas. That there is the location of settlements in the seismic areas, and the second it is that structures which are not resistant to ground motion. We, of course, after this Uttarkashi incident, there were some attempts made to retrofit the houses or to bring some kind of the resistance in the houses so that they could resist to the ground motion. And third, of course, it is that is a dense collection of buildings with high occupancy. When there was an earthquake in Delhi 3 or 4 years or so ago, of course, it was not that high on the Richter scale, otherwise probably the damage caused over here would have been real immense and colossal, but fortunately we got saved onto it because the kind of occupancy which is there and the dense occupancy rather which is there in Delhi probably would have caused lot much of it. And then, of course, lack of access to information about earthquake risks. That is another factor which is contributing to the vulnerability. In keeping with that, of course, are we really trying to do something with regard to specifically this aspect of housing being constructed which are resistant to ground motion?
You see, you mentioned ground motion, Professor Sahni. I mean, first of all, let us spend a couple of minutes on this ground motion. Now, there are two types, broadly there are two basic types of waves that are emanated when an earthquake takes place. And these are, the first set of waves are what are longitudinal waves. That is, the motion is as the wave goes along. The other are slower and transverse waves. That is, the motion is perpendicular to the direction in which the wave is traveling. That is, if the wave is traveling in this direction, the motion is either up and down or in the other direction like this. Now, this transverse motion does the maximum damage because anywhere if the ground is like that, that creates problem. And if it is something like this, then fissures takes place and then the cracks takes place, or if the faults are already there, these all get widened. Now, with that type of situation and no place being free from earthquake as of today, not knowing when the earthquake will take place and of what magnitude, now it's very difficult to design a community or a house or even a building which would be truly earthquake proof. And even if somebody designs that, it will be enormous cost, which naturally neither the individual nor the society will be able to deal with it. So how do we deal with the situation? Now, obviously, wherever there is a chance, there is a likelihood of stronger earthquakes takes place or more frequent earthquakes taking place, certain very basic precautions must be maintained. All the public buildings, that is the buildings that are built by government, say the Public Works Department, and by the big industrial houses, they do take care of the requirements, the safety factor because of the earthquake. But what about the individual? What about the general people? Now, there are certain very basic things that they can follow, and that is the part of our disaster mitigation thing. Now, for example, if there are any angles, the corners, they must be very well secured. That is, while construction, there is a method of construction by which you anchor them. If there any roof is there, they should be anchored. If there are any tiles, they should be anchored. If suppose it's a building which is coming up of the brick work, after a couple of layers of bricks, there must be some sort of a tying arrangement. In fact, traditionally, Professor Sahni mentioned Uttarkashi. Uttarkashi, it has been seen that while some of the modern construction there, they met with disaster in the case of the earthquake. Some of the traditional buildings, 2 or 3 storied houses, they are intact because they try to do some sort of a binding even with the timber type of thing. So there are methods available, including those in our traditional wisdom from which we can take advantage of. I'll also at this stage like to refer to what Dr. Vayunandan said about community preparedness. That is very important. Given whatever house we have got, if there is an earthquake, certain precautions are to be taken. It used to be said in good old days that you will run in the open if the earthquake is there, be away from any building. Now, in a city, if one is on the 2nd floor or 3rd floor, one can't immediately run in the open. If rather we create that panic, one may jump from the window and then hurt himself or herself. So in that particular case, one takes shelter in the house, maybe under a table, maybe under a bed if it is not already a box type bed, or it goes in a corner. Now these things must be previously decided in the family. If it is a family, one should know where the children would go, where the husband and wife will go in which corner. These may appear to be laughable suggestions, but these are the precise suggestions which would save somebody's life. And in case of an earthquake, mind you, it's not the earthquake which kills the people. It is the falling things, either the house or something else, the loose things that fall, they create the injury and kill the persons, or it is the short circuit of the electricity, or wherever there is a gas getting ignited and fired. So it is the short circuiting, it is the fire, it is the water running from the taps, creating some sort of a flood situation, local flooding in the house or in the area, they create problems. So we must take precaution against that, and this can be done on a community level itself, in the household level. Let me add one more thing. For example, in the common households, it is a common sight that one has some almiras in the house, maybe a steel almira, maybe a wooden almira, or maybe something else. And on that we go on adding either the books or some of the vessels, heavy vessels that are not in use or something. And if there is a small little tremor, these would be the first to fall, and maybe somebody who is sleeping there, he would not die of that little tremor of the earthquake, but one would die of a heavy brass water vessel falling from top of an almirah which has been stored there because it's of no use. So I think community preparedness is most important.
Since you were referring to the community preparedness, you were talking of the hold on kind of the things with regard to the community, that whereby we could get little relief for being away from kept holded for that particular thing. We know about this emergency handbook which has been brought out by the International Red Cross with the dealing with the earthquake specifically, where they have referred to the things that is before an earthquake occurs, during an earthquake, and after the earthquake. There are some activities which they have listed over here. With your permission, I would just like to read it out. The first is that check your home for hazards, which you were very kindly referring to it. That is like the almiras which are there, the glasses which are there, which can easily be broken and can hurt the people and so on. And then hold family earthquake drills and plan for reunification. It is again very important. Unfortunate part which is involved thereupon is that is where, when Alka was talking about the human element which is involved in it, maybe that we are absolutely ignorant or we do not want to know about it. That is one of the major reasons that we are caught always unprepared when such kind of the crisis or when such kind of casualty does happen. And then it is to teach responsible family members how to turn off utilities at main switches and valves, etc., etc. Take first aid training, which is very essential. And I mean, earthquake or no earthquake, it is probably called for at any other kind of the time also. Even during the normal times, one might need to know about it. But somehow or the other, probably we are completely, we have our eyes shut on to this particular thing. Then it is that gather together supplies and medications which will allow your family to survive at least for 72 hours. Why 72 hours? That it is hoped that maybe during that time there is some kind of the aid which is received somewhere, some help, some rescue teams are there on the site and they are able to give some relief to the people.
Delhi, I mean, where the population is large and the housing is difficult to get and there is a congested and all that. And traditionally, it used to be you run in the open. So if we are on the 4th floor in a DDA apartment where I live, for example, I mean, I don't know where we to run in the open. And then we should also not be in the open between the two multi-story buildings, because if they fall on us, then God save us. And that's the difficulty. So remain in the household. in the household we should have a prefixed places for the members of the family. As I said, under the bed used to be a very safe thing, but now there are boxed beds. Then there was divan, and divans also have got now boxes, so divans are also gone.
Some study table.
Maybe that the thing that is available, is still available, is the dining table or the children's study table, or maybe if there is any other working table. Yeah. But it should be known, say, which child will fit, not that at the same place the whole family is trying to enter into one place. Now, the very right thing will be to decide the smallest child goes where he or she is likely to be under that little table. And the others, little older ones, decide that they will just go below the dining table. The husband, wife, or the other older members of the family, they can decide which particular corner. Corner is the safest, not by the side of the wall, mind you. In the corner, because corners generally are anchored, and that's the place where directly something will not fall. On the corner, there are no beams generally. Beams are in the middle of that. So that's the normal type of construction. So that's the place, and one should decide which corner one is to go. Now, it could not be one room only, because the family where most of the time the family is there. Similarly, bedroom is different, where at night you are sleeping and 12 hours are of night and 12 hours of the day. So the chances are almost equally splitting, and say the earthquake may occur at any time of that. So there's nothing to panic, but one should decide. And I'll again repeat, nothing should be there that which can fall on the person while you are, particularly when you are asleep or you are sitting there. Any glass type of thing, any heavy things on the cupboards, things of that type. So I think that can be done.
Yeah, these are the things which are to be taken care of before an earthquake. In fact, that such kind of the drills or identification of the places is to be made up, which are to be made use of whenever such kind of incident does occur. And then likewise, there are some activities or some points which are to be taken stock of when the earthquake is on. That means during the earthquake. Like first thing which Dr. Kulshrestha has said, I just repeated, that not to be panicked. That is, stay calm. That will probably pay the people. And then it is when we are inside the house, I again repeated, during an earthquake, stay in a doorway or crouch under a desk or table. That will definitely save us. Away from windows, of course, it should be. And then watch for the falling objects. The objects which are falling, maybe we do not fall prey to that. And then if we are outside, then definitely we have to stand away from buildings, as he was referring to. Trees, telephones and electrical lines, because those may fall on us and we may again get trapped. On the road, one has to drive away from underpasses or overpasses and stop in safe area, and preferably stay in vehicles. These may be some kind of the things which could save us if God definitely is onto our side. But of course, we have people having the scientific temper may not be agreeing onto it. Then what to do after an earthquake, since Vayu had raised a question with regard to preparedness of the things. After an earthquake, first thing is check for injuries. In the Delhi center now, listeners include Dr. Sunil Kumar. He will probably tell others also how to do it. Provide first aid. Then check for gas, water, sewage breaks, and for downed electrical lines and shorts. Turn off appropriate utilities. Check for building damage and potential safety problems. Wear shoes. Clean up dangerous spills. Turn on radio and listen for instructions from public safety agencies. Maybe AIR is there to tell us about it. Don't use the telephone except for emergencies, because there may be somebody trying to contact you and one may try to get some kind of relief therefrom. So these are of course little small things. There are number of other things which are there. I wanted to definitely refer to that also with regard to this earthquake disaster mitigation. So maybe in the second session we can spend some time on to that and then take it up with the regard to the other disasters which are included in the typology for today's discussion. Yes, Elka, I pass it back to you.
Since we are almost reaching the end of our first hour of discussion, where Dr. Kulshrestha has spoken about many issues, and he has talked about he has explained us the technical terms that we come across when we read about earthquakes, and he has told us about the approaches that we are following to predict earthquakes. It is true that the predictability of earthquake is still very difficult. We scientists are working on it, but still very difficult to predict earthquake with total accuracy. And there are various factors. Human activity is also not leading to earthquakes, but vulnerability of human beings have increased. So our preparedness to earthquake has to also increase. And Dr. Sahni spoke about lots of do's and don'ts which we have to follow. And I hope our session enlightened you on various aspects and enriched your knowledge on the subject.